I'm Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation. Today, our guest is Lama Justin von Bujdoss. Justin is an American Vajrayana Buddhist teacher and writer. He served as the executive director of chaplaincy and staff wellness for the New York City Department of Correction and has professional experience in home hospice and hospital settings as a pastoral caregiver. Justin was also ordained as a Rigpa, a lay tantric yogin in the tradition of Milarepa. We meet at his newly founded Yangti Yoga Retreat Center in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, a retreat place that specializes in dark retreat, Ati Yoga, and practices to support preparing for one's death. This interview is a bit more casual as we wander the land and discuss dark retreat, completion stage practices, Justin's work, path, and intentions for this retreat place. Justin has been a guest a few times, and if you're looking for an introductory conversation on dark retreat, or want to listen into other conversations we have had, you can see the show notes for a link to our previous conversations. Hi, Justin. So delighted to be on this land and wanted to ask you the history of the land. Like what do you know about who came before here?
Yeah, so this property was originally developed by a retired colonel who wanted to turn it into a Jesuit kind of contemplative center. And from what I understand, he died before it was able to happen. And his widow lived here, and then she sold it to these two students of Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, who turned it into a bit of a retreat property. And one of the people in the couple has done a lot of dark retreat. And so when I reached out to them around buying the property for this, specific purpose, they were like, "Oh my gosh, like we'd like you to be the person." And it's a really special property. It's right next to Khandra Ling, this center set up by Namkhai Norbu, which is has the largest dance mandala for the practice of a dance terma that he revealed on that property. So really, really special. Actually, the day after closing, Dr. Nita called me. He was at Menla with Bob Thurman, and he was asking about, how the closing went and everything. And I told him, and we talked. And then that night, I fell asleep, and I had this dream of Namkhai Norbu and Dr. Nita and I in this kind of big pavilion with all these people. And I was facing Namkhai Norbu, and he gave me a big smile and hugged me. And they said, "Now you go sit with Dr. Nita. You guys have a lot of work to do here." But then I woke up. So I kind of feel in my own way that there's this blessing from him in the work that we're doing here with Yangti practice. A couple of years ago, I was at Pure Land Farms with Dr. Nita Chogyam, who runs Pure Land Farms. We were talking about the relationship between, Yangti and Pure Land Farms, and Dr. Nita was saying that Pure Land Farms should be like the sun and healing, and Sowa Rigpa and rejuvenation, and then Yangti should be darkness, dark retreat, Hatha yoga, and all the practices around death and dying. So yeah, super excited about that, and we're in the process in early stages of developing a clinical pastoral education program so that we can train people from Vajrayana kind of spiritual formation backgrounds to become chaplains. Yeah, so that's exciting because it's definitely great how the Zen traditions have really kind of cleared the way for Buddhist chaplains, but there's so much in the Vajrayana tradition that has not really been brought into clinical settings where there can be a lot of benefit. Definitely mushroom foraging I'm interested in getting into here. And then menchang, which Dr. Nita thought would be a good thing to be part of our center. So Um, once the renovation's done, then
Menchong comes after.
Menchung comes after, yeah.
And what would you put in your menchong?
It depends.
Yeah,
I have a couple recipes that he sent me. But also, like, there's a lot of,
that's like medicinal alcohol.
yeah, medicinal wine and
Wine.
medicinal beer that's barley based. So, like, Chung, basically.
Do you think when the visions happen in dark retreat, if they're outside of the realm of prescribed practice, that they're karmic visions, like people are purifying karma or have the opportunity to? Like, because I remember in our last conversation, you had alligators coming through. And I mean, yeah, what do you think about the source of visions and, yeah, it's like how they're unique to each person?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, the source is the essence of our mind. Right? But I think that we tend to kind of process things in terms of what it is that we know. Sometimes it doesn't make sense in the moment and will make sense in the future. I don't think, yeah, I think in the West, the way we're educated, we are taught to believe that everything has to have like an absolute meaning in the moment. And maybe even like psychology kind of helps kind of convince us that this is true. But it's kind of like bubbles, like seltzer bubbles, like different visions, vision phenomena come up, and they might come from a long time ago. They might come from maybe even from the future, you know. And in the Yangti, like the state of Yangti practice, really not trying to analyze anything, just letting it come, letting it go, letting it come. Sometimes these things kind of become more narrative in structure, and you just sit and watch and not not get wrapped up in kind of the imputed meaning of what might be coming up, just letting it come and go, which is why the practice of Trekcha is so important, because practice of Trekcha really is about opening up to this very kind of breezy way of being where things are just coming and going and you kind of don't care, right? Like you're just, like it says in some text, right? To let your body rest like a corpse, right? Let your speech be like severed lute strings and your mind be like that of a simpleton and just let it happen, you know?
Yeah.
But we're so, especially in the US, we're so wired to do and make and improve and create and justify things with meaning. So there's kind of like a countercultural quality to it too, And I do think that the practice does change the way you relate to things. I think the more you do, potentially, the more you're able to kind of begin to move into epitomizing like the Treksha kind of view normally. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking the past couple of years about Milarepa, like in all this time isolated in caves, right? And for some reason, that's like a really, people associate that as like a very noble, austere kind of presence. But I suspect maybe it started off that way. And after a while, I think it became very vivid, probably, which is why he was like, I'm not leaving this, right? Like I've discovered you guys can stay in your monastery. It's like, I'm going to stay here where I can talk to everybody, And so, what's also interesting about this is that it is a little bit at odds with the way things are organized or the status quo in any religion, but, in Vajrayana as well, right? Where over time, large systems have been created and they're great, right? They can be very supportive to kind of help you move deeper into practice. But I think where practice ends up taking us can be very visionary and open and not really of the system itself. And I think when you first encounter that, it's very uncomfortable, right? Because you're just, it's hard to trust what you're feeling in your heart when comparing it to the large systems that are out there. But if you do more solitary practice, if you do things like dark retreat, right, it grows in you, and so does a sense of contentment wherever you are. I think it's really special. I also really like, there's like I'm not doing this for reasons of activism, but I do feel almost a kind of activist like pull to help people into that experience rather than what I often see, which is people trying so hard to get free in systems that can be quite rigid. And um, and that's that's challenging for everybody. It's challenging to watch. It's challenging to kind of like push people away from, like, try something different, right? Go out and to do a solitary retreat, right? Get to meet yourself and experience yourself and learn to make friends with yourself. Um, but we're so trained to externalize. I think this is the other thing about dark retreat. It's like with dark retreat, like it's a very internal process, right? And you don't have the benefit of seeing. I mean, you see things, right? But there's no external phenomenon. It's like in being in a dream, right? And so in the dream state, we might react as if external phenomena are happening, but after a bit of practice, like like it happened to me last week. I had two dreams where I was like, I'm leaving this dream to go to the next one because this one is just, I need to leave it. Um, and I think that is the other thing. It's like our scientific, rational, materialist view is at odds with the essence of dharma. And so there needs to be a reckoning in practice. What it is that we're experiencing usually is not the only thing, right? There's so much more. And when we're able to kind of shift into experiencing that so much more, everything is imbued with endless potential, right? We are, but so is the environment, so is our breath, so is it the dream state. Um, Relationships, right? They were able to actually appreciate them as a manifestation of like a long energetic narrative, right? Um, where we're just kind of taking different forms. Relationships change and shift, and sometimes they're easy, sometimes they're really, really, intense and traumatic, and then it recycles and recycles and recycles. Um, but it's funny because, like, this is kind of like the truth of impermanence, right? Like, we can get our mind around the fact that everything is changing, but we still think that we're permanent and that we have control over everything in our lives, and we don't, right? And this settling into like a very kind of passive, open, spacious dharma like lets us connect to the constant change, right? Everything is just always in a phase change kind of experience, including dharma, right? I mean, this really weirds me out. Like dharma, Bhakti dharma, is beyond Tibetan language, Sanskrit language, Prakrit language, Hindu script, right? It's like it's Rigpa, right? It's full of all this like endless potential, and uh, people still argue over like translation terms and stuff like that. And I get it on a relative level, that can be important, but I actually don't think it's that important as well.
Yeah.
Um, but really, I think what keeps us like wrapped, like with a really tight hand around these things is fear, trust, confidence. It's hard to trust ourselves. It's hard to believe in ourselves. It's hard to, my root teacher always would kind of drill into me, like, remember how powerful your practice is. And the first time you hear it, it goes to your head. You're like, oh, she said I'm very powerful. But that's not what she meant, right? She meant that all of us, right, we are all either suffering in a narrative of, samsara, or we are flying through a narrative of nirvana. And to some extent, the choice is ours, right? But there's the work that needs to be done, it's associated with the choice.
As you're speaking about all the kind of the Buddhist confinements,
Mm-hmm.
like, of course, there's so many gifts in having 84,000 teachings
Absolutely.
and then all the different means, right, for all the different kinds of beings. And at the same time, there's a lot of possibility of spiritual bypassing, of reifying oneself. And I'm wondering, just with Dark Retreat, do you see it as a way for someone to, first of all, like, gauge if their practice is actually working? And then also to, if somebody has a tendency of spiritual bypass, of using it to just build oneself up, but not be really with, the nature, their luminosity, or just all of their gunk, right? All the demons and everything
Becomes like inflated. Yeah.
yeah, is Dark Retreat, does it go on both ways? Like, can it be another way to reify, or
Yeah,
does it
just
just
like
break
anything.
through?
Any
Yeah.
kind of dharma, right? I mean, you can get these earrings and be like, oh, like.
I love your earrings, though.
Well,
But,
Dr. Nita gave myself and one of his senior students a Nakpa ordination last year. This kind of long ceremony to be, Nakpas in the Yutagnintik. And so for me, it just felt important. I took the hair vows and then to take the vows to wear earrings and, these rings and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think, so for me, like there is going to have to be a little bit of a vetting for people that are doing dark retreat. Because it's potentially really destabilizing. I've led a couple people through 3-day dark retreats, knowing very well that they could not do more than that, and in both cases, it was evident that it would not have been good to do more than that. They got a real big taste of something more. I think that's the really good thing about these much shorter ones is, you begin to kind of see that, oh, there's something past what I'm seeing. There's something past what I'm experiencing. Or I think it's not to say like people are bad practitioners, but when we get overconfident, it's helpful to see that there's actually more that I actually don't even fully understand and get curious about. But yeah, I mean, it's just like anything. I mean, if you were to do like a long wandering chill retreat, that could go to your head, or a 3-year retreat can go to one's head, or receiving even a kind of fairly rare empowerment cycle.
yeah.
So I think it is. I mean, this is why working with teachers is important, right? Because they kind of have the role and also have accepted responsibility to push back, right? When we can't see our own kind of blind spots or temporary. It says like third Karmapa says like adventitious stands, right? They're like stands that are temporary and they're adventitious because we get to practice the dharma to remove them or clarify them.
I could also see, though, Dark Retreat might be a little trickier to bypass in. Is it?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
I
thinking
think
of,
you're probably right. I mean, like, like
it's more difficult to hide, or do you think, I
it's
guess,
difficult to
unless you're a
hide. I mean, because
dreamer?
everything just comes whether you're ready for it or not. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, like if it's the kind of thing where it's like, wow, I need to end my retreat because this is really intense, like that's ultimately a good thing, right? To assuming there's not kind of like a psychiatric problem that needs to be addressed, right? But I think it is really healthy to kind of hit your wall and just be like, oh, shoot, you know, oh well,
Yeah.
back to the drawing board, or back to the cushion, back to the prostration board, or whatever. Not that I think we need to like be overly kind of like like a tech bro about her practice, where it's like just, I am intense. I'm an intensive practitioner. Um, but kind of like being in a relationship with somebody who's like, and I could tell something's going on with you. Like I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Your communication's all off. Like, and then just that reckoning. That's important. I think in dark retreat it is easier to have those realizations. Um, yeah, I mean it's odd, right? Because it's so compelling in popular spiritual marketplace now. Like sports people and celebrities like getting interested in dark retreat. But really, it's context. That's the most important thing. Like, if you want to do a dark retreat to see amazing weird things, fine. The same way if you want to see, you could take plant medicine to see amazing weird things, but without the proper context,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe the work isn't happening.
It does. It does seem. I could imagine if one is just trying to figure out, oh, like where am I stuck in my practice, or what's holding me back from, such strong attachment to certain things in my life or in my mind, or it would be useful. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the other kind of part of this is we often assume that like we are the ones who have to do all the work in our practice, but like we're like have to remember that like there's this quality of where the mind is like an emerging sun, right? And it is doing a lot of the work too, right? Like we're not carrying this whole heavy load. We can feel like it, but that's a very, I mean, ultimately, very self-serving and self-centered view, like very egotistical. I am doing all of this work. In the practice of Hatha Yoga, whether it's Treksha or Dark Retreat, right, you kind of set yourself up, right, body, speech, and mind, and then it's kind of like gliding, and it's very hard to tell who's doing work. Am I doing work? Is Rigpa kind of, filling in below my wings? And that's how this whole experience is happening. So I think this is like where this actually gets a lot very different from like classical, progressive, gradual Vajrayana Buddhism, where like the way of thinking about it is different in the sense that maybe we don't have to be so obsessed with polishing my mind because our mind is already clear, vivid. It's like Buddha nature or Sujata Garbha is like always present. So we just need to kind of settle into direct, open, easeful relationship with that. And that's another strange learning that I think we as practitioners need to kind of struggle with, right? With meditation, sometimes people will say, well, like, what's the science behind it? Dark retreat, what's the science behind it? Or even, with the visions, right? Like, and the same could be said about sleep state, right? And dream state, especially like dream phenomena, perhaps being caused by, endogenous DMT in the pineal gland. And maybe that's all it is. Right? Maybe it's not. Um, I mean, both still suggest that the experience that's being had is not real. Okay. Um, and both involve like a questing for something that we can never really definitively know. Right. So we just need to kind of let go into it. And it's kind of like trying to find out like what is true love, right? And you can like philosophize about it and search like, text across the ages and all cultures and die before you find out and never really know, but also never really live. Right? So you can never really experience that. And I think that this is kind of an interesting problem for some people where they never let themselves have a chance, to practice because they're kind of, always trying to find the justification for why I should be doing it, and not trusting the sense of stillness, relaxation, ease, the calmness that the experience as being part of like the benefits.
So you were talking earlier about how definitely this will be like the moonlight and then throughline will be sunlight. And when you talk about the relationship between the moonlight, sunlight, dark, and with it clear out even the perception and the significance of
Yeah. So I mean, with Yangti practice or dark retreat, because there's an absence of light, right? It is as if the only thing that has room to come to be is the expression of all of the energy from our body. And it's kind of like what happens in the Bardo process too, right? Like after death, the visions of the wrathful, semi-wrathful, and peaceful Bardo deities are the energetic kind of almost like off-gassing of all of the different kinds of deities in your body model. And so in the initial process of dark retreat, just like the Bardo, there can be it could be uncomfortable, it can just be dull, like there can just be experiences happening, but eventually like all of this stuff begins to kind of come and you're able to experience these things. And again, the kind of art of the practice is knowing contextually how to relate to all of these things. But you can't hack. You can't rush that, right? Um, and then though, like the authentic Rigpa state arises, which is the mind of prayer life, which is incredible. And um, yeah, I don't know. I don't think everybody experiences it in the same way visually. But the sense of the freedom, the spaciousness, the vastness becomes readily apparent. Um, yeah, it's as if to say, like over the course of a dark retreat, like all these layers of conditioning kind of peel off, and a lot of them are the energies and the habituation associated with our being, right, which is part of our body. Um, and then the Richter state, begins to kind of quote unquote reveal itself, or it's able to be, experienced by the mind of clearly. In my experience from doing, repeated dark retreats, that Rigpa experience comes more quickly each time. And that's just my experience. I think people, are also a little different with these things. Um, and it helps to kind of like prep ourselves for retreats in this kind of way so that you're kind of not jumping into it straight from some busy, like chaotic time. Um, with a good basis in structure, everything can just be left as it is. Right? Um, and in that way, whether you're practicing with light or darkness, it doesn't matter. And in some traditions, one practices with, kind of light related Tögal instructions before doing dark retreat. And then in other traditions you do, um, the black instructions, the darkness instructions first, and then the light instructions. So I don't think there necessarily has to be much difference. Both seem to reveal to us that there's a lot more at play than this in one way, or that what we're really encountering is being that is timeless, and so it is constantly. I think this is why, like Jungling Control Vajratai wrote this 7-day dark retreat text that he compiled from Dungtse Rinpoche's Dharma that's called, you know, the sadhana of the British Buddhahood in 7 days. So, so remembering that the whole point of this, I mean, this is funny, right? In this day and age where everybody's obsessed with plant medicine and visions and shamanism, and I'm not saying any of those things are bad, you know, but people obsess over the visions, right? Forgetting that this is like the context is deconditioning our mind, right? Like coming to this greater experience of the clear light state. So kind of going back to your kind of question and point about inflation, right? One of the four devils or four demons in Chu, that much children, it's about the demon of inflation. Without the proper context, we do run the risk of kind of inflating ourselves and getting confused. And it's a little similar, I think, with the Bardo, right? Like the Bardo is an opportunity to recognize like our true nature and become awake. It's also the opportunity through which we can, you know, re-arise as a Nirmanakaya, you know, and benefit more beings. But without the Buddhist context, right, we can trip out.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know, and then that's kind of like what seems to be happening. I mean, it happens everywhere, right? People trip out on like sadhana practice, then they'll trip out on like, and everybody's like obsession now with somatic things, you know, feeling in my body, and it's like you have a body that has nerves and all these things. Like, of course, we're gonna feel, and we can get stuck in that. You know, I was last summer. I had the opportunity to go up to Nova Scotia with my family for a little vacation, but I stopped and had tea with Larry Mermelstein, who found in on the translation committee, and he's such a great person and a lovely friend. And we were having tea, and he was like, he turned to me, he's like, "Do you want to know why Trungpa and Dilgo Khyentse never taught tummo people?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I totally do." And he told me that they both told him that they thought that people would trip out on their bodies. And it's funny because I was taught tummo by Gyaltsen Rinpoche in a very kind of like, it was so ordinary, matter of fact. Okay, this is how you do it, and you know, Lama Sonam come and, you know, teach you the chokor and all this kind of stuff, and it was just, you know, there, right? But you know, cut to now in the contemporary times, like you just find people that are just so, they become like body obsessed by it. Which is fascinating. I mean, I definitely recognize it like as a potential gateway drug for more dharma, right? And that's good. And potentially, hopefully, like, you know, an entryway to be able to kind of experience the Rigpa state, right? Because from that practice, you can really settle into open awareness really beautifully. Or you can just get stuck in feeling all these things in your body. I think that this kind of going back to bypassing is just something that like, you know, we should always have teachers who can kind of just point out to us when we're bypassing. Then B, like, we also need to kind of learn how to be our own doctors so that we can accurately diagnose ourselves when that's happening. You know, sometimes we can catch it, sometimes we can't.
What is the significance of light for understanding our nature?
Well, I mean, you know, all we are ever experiencing, you know, visually is light, right? Like, and it is, you know, it's kind of a light that goes both ways, right? We're, you know, kind of, we tend to feel in like overly externalized split experience that there's just all this stuff that I am relating to. But I think it's more the case that all of this is arising from us, because you can find people entering into the same space having wildly different experiences, right? Like all we are ever experiencing is light and color and sound and sensation. And it's not particularly even dependent upon a body. Like, dark retreat, you can have a experience as vivid as this, sitting in a dark room. Um, in the Bardo, you can have an experience as vivid as this, with no body. Right? A body that's already either in the ground or been cremated or, been eaten, other things. And in the dream state as well. Right? Um, so our experience is, if we're really going to kind of settle into like our true nature, then it's just experience. Right? It is light. And that's all it ever will be. I mean, like you moving through time and space, me moving through time and space, all we are experiencing really is kind of the same type of things over and over and over again. But again, we have this like, obsession with there being some kind of object permanence, like this object permanence, that object permanence, and the conflict that happens when it's just really this like breezing through existence. I mean, imagine what it's like to be a Buddha, right? And I think that's probably what it is like, right? There's awareness of what is happening in this moment, but this moment is not permanent, and there's constant potential in everything that's being experienced. And weirdly enough, I'm sure there are people who will find that they can find a science to back that. But I personally find that incredibly distracting, and just like dropping a big heavy rock, that distracts from the flow of the way everything is. Like, who cares if something is measurable in that? You know.
Do you think that dark retreat helps one have more faith in all of that? Because it's like, usually you look around to, um, like if you're doing practice, structured practice or something, and you're resting in Rigpa, there might be some part that's still like, but then in dark retreat, things arise right out of, you don't have the confirmation of so many outer phenomena, the Symphonia experience. Like, do you think it helps you develop confidence in being a luminous being?
Yeah, I mean, um, so there is kind of this moments of this kind of deep ecstatic knowing that everything is okay, that this is not about completion of anything, it's not about setting out to do anything, that everything is okay. Like, again, we like talk about like great perfection or great completion, and even Bob Thurman uses great connection, right? Like the settling into the direct experience of that is connection, right? I am connected to all things, and if not me, I like that. And it's just connection everywhere, completion everywhere, perfection everywhere. There's no. So dark retreat offers you these glimpses of knowing that this is right. Um, but kind of art then though is integration afterwards, right? So like, what am I going to do with this, right? Like, because we kind of the way we will forget a dream, right? Like we'll forget, or the way people forget past lives or the Bardo experience, right? Like the question becomes, okay, like did that experience ever end now that I came out of dark retreat? And then B, like how can I kind of like blur the lines, so to speak, between the retreat I just did and this life I seem to be living now, right? So that they can kind of cross-pollinate one another. And this helps us to get out of the mindset of me, the individual thing that is doing all the work. But really, like, dark retreat is this way of kind of like dissolving a lot of discursiveness in the mind And if you can just let that dissolved experience continue, then you can notice how long it lasts. The felt experience is really important because that is how we really gain confidence in ourselves, right? Checking with teachers is great, right? But I think as we progress, it's kind of normal for a teacher to turn around and say, well, I don't know what he's, right? And then we need to be, at that point, we have to kind of be walking on our own 2 feet a bit and say, well, I think this is what happened. I think this is what's going. I would hope every practitioner can get into eventually wanting to be curious about what it means to master a practice that is that it feels like their heart practice or feels important. And again, this is where all of the work necessary to develop greater confidence in ourselves and our abilities and feel into power, but feel into this kind of felt sense of what is happening. And again, learning any kind of skill. So for example, as a chaplain, at some point you were taught different models or methods to make a spiritual assessment, right? So you sit down with somebody and you start talking and taking in all this data, and then you have to assess what does this person need, right? And over a lot of successive visits with people, you hone that skill. And then you can just say, I'm skilled at this, right? I know what I'm doing, right? And so with practice, same thing, right? Except, like everything else, right? It's not that we have to be motivated to become a master, but mastery comes the more open we are to developing and, practicing for the love of, the work, right? The love of awakening, the love of settling into Rigpa. And not as, I think this is where, again, I think for a lot of practitioners, we have this opportunity to cross a line where practice becomes just something that is innately beautiful. We do because we can't do anything else. Not because we're paralyzed or anything like that. And then just continuing to deepen and grow and deepen and grow and deepen and grow. Till eventually people become, they themselves eventually become masters for other people, right? To be able to help. And, again, I am hopeful that there will be more and more people who are able to practice in this way that I find a very mature way, because this is what will cause, this kind of Western Vajrayana to take root here, right? But if we get stuck in kind of a facetious only apprentice role forever, right? Kind of infantilizing ourselves, right? Not really feeling into what it means to assess myself, right? What it means to start trusting, the dreams I'm having or the felt senses that are being experienced, during meditation. What, the felt sense of settling into the Rigpa state versus some asking someone else what's just happened to me, or then getting very analytical and trying to I love Longchenpa, but I don't think it's our work to have an experience and then look up and look the Chogyams of how did I compare, right? I appreciate the desire and the need to do that, right? But that's not particularly helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm really appreciating what you're sharing, because I'm hearing both the need for self-reflection and self-trust. Also having a thorough practice, developing it over time to have that trust, but to try to think for oneself and feel for oneself. And it feels like such a fine line, because it's so much of becoming somebody. it's so much just like even adulting, like,
Yes,
you know, it's
100%.
like, it's so few of us think beyond the first 7 years of our life, like
Yes.
even the habits in that way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting hearing you share even from that perspective.
And, you know, again, like a grounded understanding of what Buddha nature, Sujata Garbha is, right? Like that it is not some tiny little speck somewhere, right? That it is like really accessible. Sometimes, you know, very accessible, and trusting that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
You know, I think it's confidence, trust, and relaxation are like some of the most important things. And you know, relaxation meaning just settling into ease, right? Like not worrying so much about things, you know, not worrying about practice, not worrying about like, you know, is my breath right? Or not worrying so much about, you know, is my posture. You know, trusting the Dharmakaya too, right? Like, you know, it's, you know, it's not like we need Dharmakaya to gain confidence in us, right? That connection is always there. It's more this recognition of, oh my gosh, like I've been connected this whole time, you know? And I think that that is a little bit of an experience that happens from time to time where you're like, oh, this is what it is. It's not some kind of idea I formulated about what it must be like, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause I mean, you know, in so many texts, they talk about how simple but how complex Hatha Yoga is. And the complexity is that how arrestingly simple and beautiful and non-complex or intellectual the practice is.
Yeah, we're searching, so then we miss it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's simple. I really, yeah, I'm also hearing the piece of the significance of having good elders in practice, like people that have, you know, have more experience, because then you can really rest, and then just trusting that, like trusting, okay, you have some, because even just being around
Yeah.
practitioners really does something to you. It's like if we're in our little isolated spaces trying to kind of read books, all the books that are out there, trying to guide ourselves, there's something that is, you know, there's a transmission of beingness, right? Even
Yeah.
beyond pointing out instruction, just like being with people that are resting, that are willing to unbind from the struggle.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think actually to your point, like one of the greatest things about being around practitioners who have more experience than us, or, you know, our teachers, is being around them in ordinary everyday life, right? Because like it's one thing to sit in meditation with somebody, which is great, right? Don't get me wrong. But walking through a busy street or watching people, you know, like I enjoy watching teachers teach. Like I really enjoy just that, like, you know, from like a pedagogy, like, you know, exploration of pedagogy, like how people deliver and hold and connect to others, like deliver dharma, but then how they move through space, you know, because that's the harder thing, I think. Like queuing into the experience of Rigpa at a certain point isn't hard, but then again, this kind of integrated maintenance of that while in the midst of tedious things or intense things or busy things or, you know, exhausting things, it then, you know, becomes the thing that we need to begin to learn how to do. And there's really no better way to kind of get a sense of that through being in relationship to good practitioners and teachers and things like this.
So do you want to get into the Bardos? So, okay,
Sure.
so when we spoke last, you shared about your 49-day dark retreat, and then you went through all the different Bardos, and each week you were given instruction as to the next practice to do. And I guess I'm going to make this kind of like a big question of like, will you share all the the stops in the Bardo. And then if you want to kind of parallel it to your retreat or kind of bring that in, feel free. Otherwise, you can, however you want to take this question.
The sense of like loss and separation shortly after death, right? Like, can be excruciating, right? So like if you're the type of person who is maybe not so securely attached in your relationships, right? I think there's a very strong likelihood that there will be a considerable amount of unpleasant disturbance in the recognition of having died, right? And this is the thing, it's like, yes, we've died, and yes, there's, no body that we're connected to in that moment, but we have this, very vivid sense of awareness of the fact that I've died, and it's an attempt to kind of communicate with loved ones, right? That is never met with actual satisfying, communication, right? So this agitation, but then there's also what happens after that is this kind of sense that the gravitational pull towards the loved ones begins to fade, right? And so I think what's important about that is recognizing that that will happen, right? So you don't need to worry about that. It's kind of like, two celestial bodies getting a little bit more space from one another. As they do, there's less gravitational pull, right? So there's less, less of an experience of kleshas around that. Also, because these are simultaneously kind of dissolving as a result of that too. And then, moving into this experience of the Bardo deities, right? This is everything from like, habituation in terms of like, kind of our baseline, if you're an angry person, right? You might have a lot of like experience of wrathful Bardo deities. If you can be clear and settle into the, open awareness, like, basically Chogyam or Mahamudra, right? Then whatever comes is totally okay, right? And you're able to, it basically, for lack of a better term, like it's able to self-liberate, right? You try to allow everything to self-liberate by not poking, not prodding, not, kind of moving away from some kind of psychotherapeutic model of trying to figure out like the narrative structure of why this is, right? Also because like the Rigpa state is so profound that sometimes the why will just instantly be known anyway, right? There's no sifting that has to happen like through all any kind of like data set. And then as that begins to fade, what happens is this increased opportunity to be able to settle directly into the Rigpa state, like in a very naked way, which like in the 49-day dark retreat lasted also like a number of weeks of just being. So for me, it had this, I had this experience of being in the middle of outer space, like endless space in all directions, right? Look at my body was endless space, and then just resting into that. And then you can really profoundly experience the difference between, Sam and Rigpa, like conceptual mind and Rigpa. And the benefit of that is like, this is the mind Rigpa pointing out the nature of mind, right? And then you have it for, potentially have it for a sustained period of time, which allows you to, then it's kind of like you're just sitting in the Chogyam zone. The Chogyam zone is like a tub, right? And, it's the water that you're sitting in, right? You get to kind of like, dissolve into that a bit, which is really like the point, right? The point of the practice is to be able to really vividly show us this. And when you come out, it's almost as if you can never unsee it. You can never unexperience it, So the Bardo, the benefit of going through a retreat like this is that it begins to let us, a little bit like Rushin helps us to process conditioning associated with, the 6 realms of existence. Dark Retreat helps us to be able to liberate conditioning related to the Bardo and fears around that. And then also to cause us to be able to have a greater connection, like an ability to recognize the Rigpa state. And then, again, there's this opportunity to either completely become enlightened, in the Bardo, or arise as a Nirmanakaya, with great intention, to be able to bring benefit to others.
And if somebody wanted to go to bed at night and just try to have a taste of, like, extend their Bardo experience right before going to bed, would you recommend anything that someone could do as they lay there?
Like consciously giving oneself the opportunity. Well, so here's the thing, right? Is like this whole process kind of happens every time we go to sleep anyway. It's just very short, right? It's like this kind of like very fast version. So one thing I would begin to play with is like the way the elements dissolve into one another pre-death, right? So like in the lead up to death, the element of earth dissolves into the element of water dissolves into the element of fire, the element of fire dissolves into the element of air, and then at death, physical death, the element of air dissolves into the element of space. So in laying down to go to sleep, just as one might kind of prepare like in dream yoga or clear light yoga, I would spend some time settling into these dissolutions, right? So this experience of the heaviness of our body when we're tired, right? So you're laying there, and this then is the earth element, and maybe trying to feel the weightedness of blankets or comforters or whatever, what is using, settling into the mattress and really just kind of focusing on that experience, and then earth dissolving into water, right? And letting ourselves connect to not only the water in our body, but then this kind of subtle consciousness. And with each dissolution, consciousness becoming more subtle until earth dissolves into space, right? Which is basically just kind of like falling asleep in open awareness. The other thing you can do is practice clear light yoga, right? Because clear light yoga at time of sleep leads us to this experience of awareness during the sleep state, which can be quite incredible. So, you can both awareness of, so it's not necessarily, one doesn't necessarily have dreams in this experience. There's just wakefulness, right? And so and it can sometimes be that you're aware of what's going on in the room that you're sleeping in while you're asleep, right? There's like very pronounced, awareness. And that's another really profound way to kind of prep, as it were. But the dissolution of the elements is, I think, important because, I saw this like, in my work in hospice, like I could sometimes even track it a little bit when patients, like the element of earth was dissolving into the element of water, or when water was dissolving into fire. There's kind of a correlate in terms of the kind of symptoms that people were experiencing. And, I could generally have a sense sometimes like, okay, this person's going to die in the next 2 weeks, or something like this, or next week. And it helps, right, to kind of, I don't think it's particularly difficult to have that clarity if you're just attuned in a hospice setting, right? Because you get to, especially if somebody comes on to hospice in an appropriate way where there's plenty of time for them to decline, right? It's not necessarily kind of like they've got 1 week. But these elements can also dissolve quickly too, you know. Yeah, I mean, like attunement, whether it's to somebody else or our own experience, right? Or you know, another word I like to use is being harmonized with like what is happening in our experience of just consciously falling asleep, noticing every little thing, right? Without getting like stuck or, you know, hooked on, you know, or like Trungpa would say, tripping out on our experience, right? Like letting ourselves trust the awareness that is there, and then training and just being open to that, you know, because this kind of thing is not owned by any tradition, essentially, right? Like awareness, like you don't have to be a member of a club to be able to train in developing that. However, like you'll find that the Dzogchen and Mahamudra context is a little unique to Buddhism.
So will you tell us about just like the earlier years of coming into the big D Dharma?
Yeah, the big D. Yeah, absolutely. So I was always really interested in spiritual things. So from like age 3 to 7, when we moved to New York, we actually lived in Northampton, Massachusetts. And my parents took me to, it's like an exhibit of ancient Egyptian art in Boston. And according to them, the first time I saw like Egyptian art in like person, I ran up and grabbed a statue and said that, you know, this was mine. And, you know, security guard got all freaked out. And my parents got all freaked out because they're just like, what is going on? But this led to like this kind of really intense fascination, bordering like obsession with ancient Egypt when I was young, which continued into when we moved to New York. I began to be interested in ancient Egyptian, especially funerary practices, and collecting translated magical papyri and stuff like this. Like, my parents got me the Ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead as a present when I was in 4th grade. I used to carry it with me to school, 4th and 5th grade in my backpack.
This is all making sense.
Yeah, no, totally. It's like, you know,
It's
like an old story. Exactly. Yeah, so death has like always been something really just fascinating, but also like really comfortable, you know. So like, you know, my dad being an artist, he had paint all over the place, and grew up in this loft in Soho, and I painted life-size Anubis, like, you know, paintings on the walls of my room. But then I became interested in kind of a little bit of like early Greek kind of magical practices, and then kind of Western mystical traditions, including alchemy. And I spent a summer in Glasgow, Scotland, working with this person, Adam McLean, who at the time, and probably still is, like one of the kind of greatest scholars on the practical, basically the practice of alchemy. And I spent time transcribing early English manuscripts, like from the 1400s to 1700s, the summer of 1995 there. And then...
So how old were you?
I was 20. And so after that is when I, like, from there I went to India for the first time on the study abroad program with the Antioch program. Because I picked Antioch because, as a college, because they had this study abroad program to India. Because in high school, I wanted to be a monk, and was a pen pal with Lelung Tulku Rinpoche, who's he's the present incarnation of the Lelung Rinpoche that Dr. Nita's Karma Mudra book is about. Yeah, so it's all this kind of interesting.
And how did you even get in touch with him in the first place?
So there was this shop called Vision of Tibet in Soho, and I found a flyer. He was raising money. How are you?
Hello.
He was raising money to rebuild his monastery in Tibet. And so it was just a brochure. So I wrote him a letter, and then we became pen pals, and we wrote back and forth. I was able to raise about $3,000 towards the monastery rebuilding project. And then when I was like senior year of high school or something, he came to New York to teach at Tibet House. Like Bob Thurman invited him, and he and I had an afternoon together going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, riding this subway up together. He gave me a dharma name.
What was it?
It was Tubden Dorje. And then stayed in touch a bit, actually, because after I met my root teacher in Sikkim on that study abroad program in 1995, I was in India for 6 months at the time. Afterwards, I went down to Drepung, which is where he was being trained. But he then entered into Gyro Tantric College, and he set me up with Geshe Wangchen to study with him. So I studied with him in Drepung for a couple of months. In Mungod, Karnataka, which was a great experience. But I had already begun to kind of understand. My root teacher was like, she's like, "You're not Gelug, you're Kaju," and then I began to appreciate at Drepung what she was talking about. It was like,
say more.
Just the practice stuff. I didn't. I'm like a very intellectually curious person, but I get bored really easy with like intellectual dharma, but yeah, there's always been this great comfort around death, and then magical practices. Like I did have some experience with like practical Western magic, having doing rituals and stuff. When I was in high school, I would wake up at 5 a.m, take a cold shower, do magical mind training practices. It was very, very funny.
I love this. I really would love the Egyptian learning from your early years to be integrated here.
Yeah.
And the alchemy.
Yeah, the alchemy stuff is still, it's funny because in cultures where there's scribal traditions, where people copy things out by hand, right? This is how you really learn something. And yeah, I spent it's 2.5 months writing out whole books in early English. And sometimes the dreams I would have, those nights were just absolutely extraordinary. These basically alchemical woodcuts come to life, and
You've been steeping your mind in possibility.
Yeah. No, this is where I kind of feel like there's this idea that all that we're ever doing as practitioners is emerging, right? Almost like a shoot, like a little plant shoot. We will eventually kind of emerge as we are. But it takes a while based on conditions to get there. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this life has just been a lot of emerging. And the themes are all very similar. But I think similar, but moving towards abstraction. Mm-hmm. And I think this also as Dharma practitioners is ultimately the way we go. Hopefully, as towards the abstraction of Rigpa, right? With this, like, you know, just settling into just unpatterned, vast, open being. At least that's the way it feels to me. Like this, this length is about that, which is why, you know, the Yangti thing. I mean, I don't think, for me, Yangti practice gets us into that state in such a profound way. Like what the alchemists were talking about, you know, what was at the core of any kind of spiritual seeking, like that. So there's actually, what was it? Chogyam Trungpa says this about Yangti. He says that if you're Tibetan, it solves all the problems for Tibetans. If you're Indian, it solves all the problems if you're Indian. If you're Chinese, it solves all problems if you're Chinese. So like, meaning that like what is experienced is beyond culture, right? It's beyond any of these kinds of specific locations that, you know, again, are beautiful and in and of themselves, you know, fine and great, but they're only just reflections of a delivery system, you know, almost like mistaking a syringe for what is in it, you know.
It makes sense because you can't be you can't have form in there in your Yangti, like there's nothing to keep holding on to in terms of like a liturgy or
that's right
there's the imprints.
Yeah, or, you know, people, it's very fun, like people who are very attached to like Yidam practice will ask, well, can I do all of my mantras? You know, and it's like, no.
Yeah. Would you though recommend, like if somebody was trying to, because obviously in Kala Chakra, dark retreat is often connected with Hiram. Would you ever recommend for someone that's really wanting to develop a deity to do that in dark retreat?
I think in the context of Kala Chakra, like to practice it in that way, but that's not it's not my kind of specialty, so to speak. So I don't have the, oh, it's interesting. So like in the Karma Kaju illusory body text, like the text for that practice, there's a little passage at the end which I never understood, which was, you know, in that text there are like 4 different ways of practicing illusory body in terms of like increasing subtlety. And it says at the end, if none of these work, go into a dark room. And so when I first encountered, you know, those instructions and, you know, received those instructions, I never understood what that meant. But then after the first dark retreat I did, like this preparatory 7-day retreat, I understood everything that it was kind of getting at, right? Like, so it helps with that. I guess the only thing is like not being attached to the technique, right? Like not getting attached to, you know, there's that funny story, I think previous Kala Rinpoche taught this, where, you know, this teacher sends his student into a retreat to do a Yidam practice, and, you know, the student's really focused on it. The Yidam has like 6 arms, so he's like focusing on it. The teacher comes to see him, and then the student is so excited. He's like, oh, I'm going to wash my teacher's feet. I'm so happy that he's come. So as the student's doing it, the teacher manifests 2 more legs. And the student's like, I got this. Like, you know, so he manifests 2 more arms. And so the teacher manifests 2 additional feet. And then the student is like, oh, my Yidam has 6 arms. This is perfect. And then the teacher manifests 2 more. And the student's like, oh, shoot. Like, I can't do this. Right? And the whole thing being a, you know, like a allegory or teaching on how easy it is to get stuck or attached to where you don't,
Yeah.
where I kind of change out the attachment for this fleshy body for whoever the deity is,
So you were talking about Tögal practice earlier. And often Tögal is seen as a more laborious practice compared to Chökchö. At least that's how it's often spoken about. Do you feel...
Like with the postures and the asanas and all this,
Like, and also that, like, if you have Chökchö, like, that's enough. Like, just... so what are your thoughts on Tögal and dark retreat? Like, is it more approachable in dark retreat than it would be otherwise? Or if that's been the case?
In dark retreat, you have the same asanas that you'll use in Tögal. And also, there's a way of practicing dark retreat that's also very loose. I think it is true. All you do need is Chökchö. We could say, realizing the primordial purity of mind and appearance is enough, through that practice. I think the thing I love about Chökchö is when you really get into it and it becomes, just very automatic, it's so beautifully simple, right? And I just find that extraordinary. So I think it's important for people to know that you don't have to do all of them, right? Chökchö is enough. You look at Flight of the Garuda, right? The text is on Chökchö only. And what an exceptional text, right? So, I think for me, like I practice dark, Yangti more than I practice Tögal with light instructions. Why I practice Yangti is for some karmic reason that I don't, it's not fully available to me to know, which is why I do it. But for people, practitioners, they should really kind of feel into what is natural for them. I think one of the benefits I've received from practicing kind of at the intersection of Sowa Rigpa, I'm not a very good Sowa Rigpa practitioner. Here's a little sneak. Is this idea of feeling into one's typology as a practitioner, right? And again, sometimes, with a lot of good intention, we'll think and analyze our practice with our intellect and not necessarily know from our heart what kind of practitioner we are, what our heart practices. So when I got after I did the 49-day dark retreat, and Dr. Nita was kind of examining my experiences, and he asked me, what I thought. I was like, I think this is my heart practice. So like this, if you practice Dzogchen, Chökchö can be your heart practice, dark retreat can be your heart practice, Tögal can be your heart practice, or, there can be fluidity. But I think also it's important for us to listen to what we glom onto in an attached and fixated way, sometimes just because these things are super secret, right? And it's easy to kind of find ourselves finally getting the super secret instruction and then just thinking, oh, really? Like that's not so magical.
Or it doesn't suit you.
Or it doesn't suit us. Yeah, exactly. So
do you feel like if someone were to choose a practice, to take into consideration constitution, but if their heart calls in another direction, the heart supersedes?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, very early on, so this was actually the first time I went to India. I had met my root teacher, she was in Sikkim, and I was coming back down to Bodh Gaya and spending the night in Darjeeling before hopping on a long bus ride from Siliguri down to Gaya. And I had this dream of Vajrayogini. And it was like being struck by lightning. Vajrayogini, like Vajravarahi, appeared like in full, bright, red, hot, fiery kind of, form. And I knew, I was like, oh, this is my yidam, right? Like I knew 100%. And so and I think this is partially my, with my root teacher's support. And she's kind of like, just feel in your heart into what, like, as to what you feel connection to. So for me, it was, Vajravarahis. I did everything I had to do to connect with that practice. Boku Rinpoche taught me that and taught me, led me through all the phases of the practice, outer, inner, and secret. And I still love that practice. However, these seeds that my root teacher planted in my mind with Mahamudra, Chekcha in particular, and some aspects of Tögal, which she taught without telling me she was teaching them, are all fruiting, right? And Boku Rinpoche was a great Mahamudra master. Like, I studied and practiced that under him for about 7 years. But, this thing of like, there are like phases of practice, phases of relationship to things. And I think you're right. Like, we do need to listen to our heart, and that does supersede like how it looks on a spiritual resume.
Yeah. So what do you think then happened for the Vajravarahi practice? What happened that you completed? You felt complete, like it's no longer maybe the center of your devotion.
Yeah, I mean, she's still very, very important. But that relaxed, open, free nature of Chogyam Mahamudra is like, I mean, that's the thing. But that's also her mind, right? That's Vajravarahi's mind. And part of it, I suppose, is also learning to be able to appreciate how the depth of practice shows up, right? So you start off practicing a yidam, and then you begin to kind of feel into the energy of the yidam, the emptiness of the yidam, the passion. So for Vajravarahi in particular, this kind of like, passionate intersection of emptiness, bliss and emptiness, right? Desire and emptiness. That is still very resonant for me. But then the space, right? That quality, which I like to think of more as like Samanta Badri, right? Like I think like Dzogchen and Mahamudra are inherently feminine practices. This kind of like, space piece being like a generative. It's like everything arising from Rigpa, everything arising from a womb, everything being able to be held in a non-paternalist, non-judgmental kind of way. Like that's the natural compassion of the practice. And that's like Vajravarahi's compassion. So I think maybe it is a little deepening of relationship. But like I said earlier, like I think that for some reason for me, and I guess this is about knowing our typology and knowing how we are as spiritual practitioners, my practice is an emergence towards spaciousness. And but I think that is also why I've connected to the teachers I've connected with. Like my root teacher was almost like, we could say, like a yogini of space. Boku Rinpoche, master of Mahamudra, Dr. Nida, a specialist in Yutuk Nintik, but especially at Dzogchen and, the dark retreat practice. Gyaltsen Rinpoche, this kind of master of all the Kaju Tantras, but also Mahamudra. So while I might have thought of myself as all of these different things, what I didn't really realize was that it's one family of space. And I think it's probably this way for most practitioners as well, but we get caught up in the appearance of it all. I mean, that's what it's at the root of all practice. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, like, I recently gave the empowerment, the CJ empowerment, Mahamudra empowerment, that's unique to the Shije tradition to somebody, and you use manjushri as the principal kind of symbol of Mahamudra, which is really interesting. It's a kind of it is unusual, yeah. But this is what I mean, is like at the essence, the core essence of, Manjushri is Mahamudra, right? Mahamudra and Treksha really aren't any different, right? So for me, like really coming here, I was joking with my wife, but I was like, this is like, this is where I come out to pasture. This is like Dzogchen in the woods. Okay, so this is one of the cabins that we'll be using. Believe it or not, I carried that wood-burning stove out.
From inside the cabin?
Yes. I don't know how I did it. So
The power of devotion.
exactly, the guru's blessings. So we need to actually get rid of the kitchenette and put in a shower stall and a incinerator toilet, and then it smells of mice in here. Oh, what? Yeah, step. But so cover up all the windows, of course. This cabin I kind of want to make so it can have a dual function, so people can come and do Treksha here too. So just waiting on the building permit, and then we can start the work. But it's nice, wood and in good shape. To just waiting on the county building department, and I'll have a contractor help with some of the stuff that I can't do.
But we learned off camera that you have a background in contracting.
Yes, that's right. In addition to all my other,
Which I
secret.
think is so cool for people to hear, because they probably don't realize you have all these other skills.
All these other skills, and I'm available for hire.
Only dark retreat.
Only
cabins.
dark retreat cabins, yeah. And so the garage we're going to turn into a meditation hall on the first floor. Actually, I'm in the process of having a 30-inch copper statue of Yutuk Yonten made right now that we'll install, and then all the statues I have at home and tankas and everything we'll place in there, and then protector shrine up on the second floor to be able to focus on that. So one of the things I want to allow people to do is come here, kind of just do some personal retreat with light before a dark retreat, do some protector practice, some Treksha in the temple, then move into dark retreat, and then, as you saw, the trail afterwards for integration, spend a couple days just communing with nature and spending time processing
Like
what's
going on walks.
walks, practicing outside, listening to nature. Because when you come out of these retreats, as you could imagine, you're highly, highly kind of sensitive and attuned to things. Transitioning, not that it's problematic, but it takes more energy than you think. Last August, I did a 9-day dark retreat and then spent a couple days just kind of integrating. And then as I was driving home, our car broke down on a bridge. And I was in such a spacious place that I had to call my wife to ask her to call for a tow truck because I didn't have the ability.
Rest there.
I was just like, I'm going to live here on this bridge.
Like, is it an appearance? Has this actually broken down?
Yeah, exactly. This is a phone, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
All of that. So, just to be able to provide a supportive structure for people, not only to enter into the retreat in an appropriate way, but then also, leave a retreat in a way that's just grounded in the context of, Dzogchen. So this pond cabin, again, will be renovated shortly. And then there are 3 other structures. Actually, one of them is a sugar house.
Are you gonna make maple syrup?
Yeah, that's the plan. Actually, when being a city boy, when I closed, there were no leaves on the trees. So I was like, I don't know what are maple trees. And then the great thing was watching the leaves. The trees bud, and that's a maple tree. That's a maple tree. Actually, also all above there are maple trees, so we can set those gravity systems. And I'm curious, I want to talk with Dr. Nita about if there's a maple syrup based chulin.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
At the very least, we could have maple sugar treats.
Yeah.
When people come out of the retreat.
You're living on menchong.
Exactly.
Maple syrup.
Exactly.
This is going to be an interesting Pure Land.
It is, yeah.
There must be, there's so many sweets often used in medicines.
Yeah.
So there must be a use for it, even though it's not common. I don't think there is maple syrup in Tibet. So.
Yeah, I don't think so. But yeah, so this is could be a unique chulin to North America.
Yeah.
So this was an outdoor kitchen building. Oh, nice, Devin. So this is going to be renovated. And then this cabin, actually, we need to remove the back third. Actually, this one, after that, though, it's good to go. It has, toilet, it has water, it has heat, all of these things. And then here's the sugar house. And then...
There's the other cabin over there.
And the other cabin over here. Yes, this one, the pond house?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one I actually would like to make also like a crossover light, it could be light or dark. So that you can sit, redo the deck, of course, but you can sit out there and look out over the pond.
So going back to Tögal, so there's certainly, as you mentioned, the postures for Tögal. Are there any other, if you would like to speak about that, that would be great. And also if there's any other dark retreat embodiment suggestions or, things that people do with their body in dark retreat.
So, with both sets of practices, there's this kind of key part of the practice in trying to remain as still as possible, right? And I think this is where there's a bit of a differentiation. This is not the only place where there's differentiation, but between what you find in different kinds of Ana yoga practices, chokor and things like this. When you move the body a lot, this kind of increases the conceptual mind, right? A lot of analysis, a lot of thought activity. And with Tögal, with either light instructions or dark instructions, you're really trying to let all of that settle, right? And this also means that breathing becomes, try and let your breathing become subtle, shallow is not the right word, but really just, it is kind of a bit of a shallow breathing, very, very light breathing, almost as if you're not breathing. And this kind of keeps one from activating conceptuality. This is where it's a little bit different from Trekcha. With Trekcha, you learn how to practice with thought activity, and then with stillness and awareness, and see them all as essentially the same. But with Tögal, you're really trying to let everything settle so that then whatever comes. and with dark retreat, practice, there are, I guess you could say, styles of gazing. But then you also need to kind of learn how to be able to do that's not forced, right? So it's funny, I was teaching this class on the Uttuknintik Hatha Yoga just yesterday, and we were talking about, I was teaching on, this way, the kind of initial way of purifying the three gates. So, leaving the body like a corpse, and, cutting the lute strings of your speech, and resting your mind like a simpleton. And it is so hard for people. Like, I love it. I'm just like, oh my God, this is my happy place. But watching people actually begin to kind of experience anxiety around letting go of thinking, right? Or just being still, or not having to. So speech can be, so the severing the lute strings of speech can also, though, mean energy and activity. And so how to be able to not exert energy in the moment too. So this is why Trekcha usually, Trekcha comes first, right? Because you're training all of this so that when you practice Tögal, there's this kind of maximal comfort in no energy, right? And this is a really kind of anathema practice, especially for Americans who are always like commenting. There's running commentary going on in our mind. There's often running commentary coming out of our mouth. And there's, ideas usually about how every situation can be improved. And with Tögal, again, you leave it all alone and see what arises, right? What comes. So you're really kind of learning how to be able to, in one way, like move past your own kind of conditioning.
Is there anything else just in general that you want to share? Anything that's on your mind these days, or anything, aspirations for this beginning of this offering?
Yeah, so I think the one thing I just want to say is that, the main goal for the work here is for me to help support people to experience the vastness of the nature of their mind. And I am really inspired by the fact that this is so close to a place where Namkha Norbu revealed an important dharma, and that he found that this land, this property, as well as the property, of course, next door, is very sacred and associated with dakinis. On the other side of so if you follow this road, the road up to Kandraling is there, but there's also the road to the birthplace of Mary Lyon, who was the first woman to found a college in the United States. And she was born there in the late 1700s. So that's also kind of like, she's like a wisdom dakini.
Yeah.
But above all else, this is really about supporting practitioners to be able to realize this wisdom dakini aspect of mind, right? The essence of Rigpa through the practice of dark retreat. And the work, that we're committed to around supporting people in practicing at the end of life. And whether it's Poa or Bardo practice or clear light practice, really holding people so that they can train and focus on this in a rime, right? So non-sectarian, open, spacious way, so that the Dharma can continue to take root in this land and in people's hearts, and that feels really important to me. And just listening. Like, I think the big thing for me is like, all of that stuff sounds ambitious, but it's really not, right? This is just about being in open relationship to everything that's arising and supporting people to be able to do the same thing. And maybe it will lead people to drop out a little bit. Like, I kind of feel like we need this, right? Settling into ease, letting go of ambition and clinging and all the stuff that seems to be destroying the world, you know, and brings great suffering to people. So I think above all else, you know, this is really a place where we can really begin to kind of harmonize to this intersection of open awareness practice and maybe humans returning to the land. You know, we can't really farm here because it's forest, which is interesting, because at first I was, or maybe we can, and I'm just ignorant of that right now, but there is something really special about being in a forested place. You know, there's so many birds, and as you've seen, there's so many amazing plants that are medicinal here. That's going to take me months and months to catalog and understand and begin to vision how we can use that as a support for practitioners here.
Maybe a yang tea flower essence.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, yang tea flower essence, and also to work with Pure Land Farms, you know, which is in Topanga. They can't grow everything there, so we can grow things here that, you know, aren't available in the LA area. And to support others, right? Like, just, you know, whoever we can support, it feels really important. But I think what I also you know, have so much joy in my heart around this maybe being also a place of just natural arising, like, yogic lineage, right? Where it's, the frogs seem to agree.
Yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah, they do. I mean, you know, again, most of my teachers have been monastics, and I love that, right? But I think of Milarepa, I think of Shabkar, you know, I think of all these known and unknown yogis and yoginis who have just spent time outside practicing in a setting like this. And I feel like in the United States in particular, like, let this be, you know, the monastery. Let the frogs be the sangha, birds, and, you know, everything else. Yeah.
I mean, everybody here is meditating.
Yeah, they're resting in their natural
They're
state.
resting in their natural state.
Yeah,